as Ian points out, they're picking arbitrary points on the graph because at a certain point after the mask mandate, the cases skyrocketed in the places that have masks. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're looking here, and it's not like the day after. You're talking about a 3 and 4 fold increase after that. And what you see is right after the mask mandate, the level of increase in the places with no mask is much smaller. And then over time, you see the masks area, the mask arc goes down a little. But here's the problem with that. If you see that massive spike, they're making it like everybody is subject to be infected all the time. That's not the case. The more people who are infected in your community, the less people can be infected tomorrow. It's not even about herd immunity. It's about the fact that assuming places that have higher rates of early infection are seeing a reduction simply because of a one factor variable introduction is not scientific. There is no scientists on the world, and if scientists are saying bigger, larger places are seeing a drop in infection rates compared to smaller places because of a mask mandate, when they're not considering a multitude of other factors, they're not controlling for other factors, they're not telling you about testing. And then the woman who was advocating it was said something very interesting. The woman on the local news report in Kansas said, "Well, the infection rate's going up higher in the rural places than it is in the places that have the mask mandates, but it's not showing up in deaths yet. But we expected it will later." Well, it's been 4 months. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's been 4 months. Why did she throw that in there? So after 4 months, the counties that don't have mask mandates are not seeing dramatic variations in increases in deaths. They're not seeing dramatic death in Kansas. But she's saying, well, we might see it later. What do you might see it later? If you see an increase in mortality this winter, it has nothing to do with July or August. It doesn't take 5 months. So this person, my buddy Shane Gray pointed out this tweet to me. And Ian says, well, they pull a sleight of hand. And then this other expert comes on and says, well, the deaths aren't really higher. Well, that's really the only thing we can count on. We have no idea looking at a PCR test if you really are seeing an increase in spread from an increase in cases. We don't even know what a case is. The CDC at one point was mixing up serology tests. They were mixing up antigen tests with the PCR tests. Then we found out that all of the PCR positives are not infectious positives. We don't know if a person who tests positive, if they are even infectious. Because according to the CDC, you might be positive for 3 months, but you're only contagious 10 days after this onset of symptoms. The CDC specifically states that even if you have a positive and it's been 24 hours since your fever went away, then you're good to go. Well, that sounds nice, but it also tells you that the PCR tests themselves aren't really telling us who is or is not really infectious. So we have no real metric. We have no real way of knowing what the hell is going on with the virus beside deaths and mortality. And for her to say after all the hip hop and all the hoopla about the hospitals filling up, oh, well, we're not seeing an increase in deaths. Shouldn't that be the first thing? I mean, who cares if you test positive? Who cares even if you get the sniffles for 2 weeks? The idea is mortality. The idea is keeping people alive. And people in no mask counties are not dying, according to the very expert who's making the statement about the situation. So what they're doing is they're playing this game where they're connecting a positive in your mind. What they're doing is they're creating an intellectual association game where a positive in your mind is associated with death, and a positive in your mind is associated with you being irresponsible, with you being careless and putting other people at risk. When the reality is that according to her, the people who got infected, as they say, who tested positive, didn't kill anybody or didn't kill people. For one thing, the entire concept of you testing positive is an example of you killing somebody. That already in and of itself is that's a moral corruption. Okay? Comparing um comparing breathing and the assumption, which is unfounded, which is completely untestable, that you killed somebody else because someone around you got sick, and to suggest that you are, as a person, killing other people by not wearing a mask is a moral corruption. The fact is that from 0 to 34, more people were killed in 2019 from murder than COVID-19. Murder, actual specifically killing of another person. And we didn't make any, if someone had said we're going to shut this down because, twice as many people from 25 to 34 died from murder than COVID-19. Because of that, we're going to shut down this, and that. We're going to shut down things specific. And let's be honest, last year, about 57% of those people were black people. So if you're saying that, and murder is a public health issue, so we're harder on people walking around living their lives than we are on murderers. You don't ever hear these people say murderers in this place and that place. We don't talk about it. Nobody has anything to say about it. Why? Because this is a way to demonize rural Americans. This is a game. Because we're coming up to the reality that there are black people in this country that are getting it. They're getting that rural Americans are not our enemy. That Republicans are not our enemy. I'm not a Republican. And that's what they're afraid of. The COVID-19 regime is afraid that working class black folks and working class rural Americans and some other people who are intellectuals, who have more money, like the Elon Musks or whatever, are gonna finally say, hey, wait a minute. Why am I hating on this person in rural America? Why am I hating on this person in the city? Joe Biden was elected on the strength of how bad COVID-19 was, and on the strength of how bad race relations were. They need that. They can't take their foot off the pedal on this until he gets in. But the fact is, if you're going to say a place that's hard hit or harder hit by COVID than another place is seeing a reduction in positivities, if you're assuming positive tests reflect the actual action of the virus, which if you look at the PCR definitions and the people who created the test, they say it doesn't do that. PCR test just tells you generally how much virus there is, not what the virus is doing at the time. But the problem is that they want to go after rural Americans because they won't come to heal. And they know that if black folks and if white folks in the city and these women that you call Karen, if these people start to realize that we're being played and played against our own identities, then they're going to have a problem on their hands. So they play this game. There is no way you can say just assuming that. And again, Ian points out they're very selective because at one point you see on the graph after the mask mandate 3 weeks, the infections skyrocket. Well, how is that happening? If the infections skyrocket and then come down a bit, you can't say it's because of the mask. That's not science. If the masks work, then it should be dropping. It should be a smooth curve. Any jagged lines means you're dealing with variables that cannot be specifically attributed to the mask. It's not like the mask mandate is taken on and taken on, turned off, turned on, turned off. So any jagged lines means that you're not being able to establish causality. And just in conclusion, comparing places with completely different populations, comparing places with different ethnic populations, comparing places with different income populations, comparing places with different population density, different community situations is not science. Comparing 24 counties to 81 counties, right there, it doesn't make sense. The only way you could really try to measure a mask mandate is if you measure two places with the same population and the same economics and the same basic. You almost can't do that because, and considering that all the democratic cities and all the big cities pretty much have mask mandates, there's really no way to actually measure the effectiveness of a mask mandate because you just made everyone do it. So what they're doing is they're depicting the rural American counties as the failures because they need that fuel. They need that fuel. They need you to be angry at these rural Americans because they're creating something, this image of a rural American spreading COVID and then coming to the city and killing someone in your. That's not how it works. If you look at the CDC, they say in general, your pandemic radius is the 20 closest people to you. If you drive from Jefferson County to South City and order a latte, you have to wear a mask in there. So the only way you're spreading anything, as they say, is if you're hanging out with a buddy that chooses not to wear a mask. So they've created this image of the rural Americans spreading COVID-19 with no concern or no regard for your safety is a cultural scam. Bottom line is, they simply don't know how people get it. They don't have a handle on this. And they, even by their own admission, most people get it, aren't dying, and they're dying at a slower rate than they were in April. So thanks for listening. Again, this is the Gray Falcon signing off. Until next time, values control.